Hey everyone, we talk all the time about rich countries and poor countries, but what does that actually mean? Today, we're going to dig into how we measure a country's success, and we're going to challenge some of those old school ideas and look at the really complex problems that come along with them.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First up, we're going to rethink what a nation's wealth really is. Then we'll see how we classify countries based on that thinking. After that, we'll get into the hidden costs of what we call development, listen to some powerful voices who are pushing for a better way, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with the key takeaways you'll want to hold on to.
All right, let's jump right in. For the longest time, we've really just focused on the bottom line, on the money. But it turns out there's way more to a country's prosperity than just dollars and cents. So, this is the big question, right? If you had to line up all the countries in the world from most to least successful, what would you even look at? For a long, long time, the answer was actually pretty simple and focused on just one number.
And that number was this thing called gross domestic product, or GDP. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's basically the total value of everything a country makes and sells. Simple enough, right? If the GDP is high, the country's doing great. The problem is, that number doesn't tell you anything about clean air, or if people are happy, or if they have good schools.
But then check this out. Back in 1995, the World Bank came along and flipped this whole idea on its head. They said, hang on, a nation's real wealth, well, 60% of it is its people, what they called human capital, their skills, their health, their education. 20% is its environmental capital, like its forests and clean water, and the built capital, the roads and factories that GDP measures, that's only about 20% of the picture. So building on that idea, other groups started saying, hey, instead of trying to boil everything down to one single score, why don't we look at a whole dashboard of things? Stuff like public safety, human rights, and access to recreation. It gives you a much richer and frankly more honest picture of what life is actually like for people there. Okay, so with this new way of thinking about wealth, how does that change how we actually classify countries? Because the way we group nations has also changed a lot. Back in the day, during the Cold War, the world was pretty much split by ideology. You had the capitalist First World, the communist Second World, and then pretty much everyone else got lumped into the Third World. Well, that system's gone now. Today, we talk about developed and developing countries, and it's mostly based on economics, like a country's gross national product. And to get a bit more detailed, we often use this three-tiered system: less developed, moderately developed, and highly developed countries, LDC, MDC, and HDC for short. And as you can see here, it's not just about the money. It looks at other things too, like literacy rates, how much energy the country uses, and the quality of its infrastructure, its roads, its power grid. Okay, but this is where the story gets a little messy. This whole path to becoming a developed country isn't always a simple, happy story. A lot of the time, this so-called progress comes at a really high price. One of the biggest hurdles for less developed countries is this phenomenon called brain drain. It's exactly what it sounds like. A country's best and brightest, the doctors, the scientists, the engineers they desperately need, end up leaving for better jobs and a higher standard of living somewhere else. And you can see how it works, right? It's this vicious cycle. A less developed country scrapes together its resources to educate someone. But then a more developed country offers them a great opportunity, so they leave. And just like that, the LDC loses a crucial asset, which makes it even harder for them to develop in the first place. And sometimes the price of progress isn't just about losing talented people. It can be absolutely tragic. A really stark and heartbreaking example of this is the 1984 chemical plant disaster in Bhopal, India. So what happened was an American company, Union Carbide, built a plant in Bhopal, specifically because the labor was cheap and the safety laws were weak. In 1984, that decision had horrifying consequences when a cloud of deadly gas leaked out. And in the years that followed, the victims and their families got almost no real compensation for what they went through. And that number, several thousand, that's just the people who died almost immediately. So many of them were from the poorest communities, living in slums right up against the factory fence. It's just a brutal reminder that the costs of this kind of industrialization often fall on the people who benefit from it the least. So you can imagine tragedies like Bhopal sparked these really powerful movements calling for change. People started demanding something called environmental justice, and they started calling for a greater respect for worldviews that don't just put profit first.
One of the reactions is something you've probably heard of, the NIMBY principle, not in my backyard. I mean, nobody wants a hazardous waste dump built next to their house. But it brings up a really tough question. Our society creates all this nasty stuff, so where is it supposed to go?
And this gets into a really complex and pretty tough debate. If you look at where these hazardous sites end up, historically they're often in minority neighborhoods. So the question is this environmental racism? Are they being targeted on purpose? Or is it an economic reality where the land is cheapest in these areas and people with less money are the only ones who can afford to live there? The cause is debated, but the results is often the same. The most vulnerable people bear the biggest burden.
And to see just how complicated this can get, look at the debate over oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. You have the Gwich'in people who are completely against it because the caribou herds are absolutely central to their culture and their spirituality. But then you have another indigenous group, the Inupiat Eskimo, who are actually in favor of it because they would benefit financially. There's just no simple answer here.
And this quote, it really gets to the heart of a completely different way of seeing the world. For a lot of indigenous cultures, development isn't about just taking resources to make a profit. It's about balance. They see humans as just one part of this huge connected community that includes everything, the animals, the rivers, and even the spirits. For them, real development has to honor all of those connections.
All right, so let's pull all of this together. Here are the key things you'll absolutely want to have locked in from our discussion today.
So first, remember that GDP is just one piece of the puzzle. It doesn't tell the whole story. The World Bank's idea is that a nation's true wealth is its people and its planet. Make sure you know the difference between LDCs, MDCs, and HDCs. Understand what brain drain is and why it's such a problem. And know what environmental justice is all about, that fight for fair treatment. And finally, really appreciate that Indigenous perspectives offer this powerful, holistic alternative to how we usually think about progress. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. If we really believe that a nation's true wealth is its people and its planet, how does that change our definition of progress? What does it really mean for a country to be developed? It's a question that kind of makes you rethink everything, doesn't it?